everyone, and welcome back to the Millcreek Government Channel. I'm Jessica Stutzman. Whether we know it or not, trees play a huge role in our everyday lives and are vital to the ecosystem and our community. They give us oxygen, store carbon, stabilize the soil, and provide shelter to wildlife. Just as it is important to plant a small sapling, it is equally important to maintain the large trees that have been planted hundreds of years ago. Joining us today to discuss a plan for the future of Millcreek's trees are Tim Ackerman, Erie County Service Forester for the DCNR Bureau of Forestry, and Ashley Marsteller, Director of Parks and Recreation for Millcreek Township. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thanks for having us back.
Well, I do love to talk about all things related to the environment. So, you know, recycling and trees, those are my passions. So, Tim, I just want to dive right into something that you offered to Millcreek Township that we are really, really appreciative of and grateful for. A recent urban tree inventory was completed for Millcreek Township and specifically for the Parks and Recreation Department. What is a tree inventory and why is it recommended to complete one?
So you're right, there was a tree inventory completed in August of this year. It was a great opportunity in a partnership with the Bureau of Forestry, the Tree Vitalize program, Millcreek Township, and then also the PA Outdoor Corps, which is part of the Student Conservation Association. Tree inventories are really important when it comes to managing our trees, whether that's in the forest in a conventional management plan, when it comes to a timber cruise, but it's equally as important and sometimes especially more so when it comes to our urban and community trees. The inventory serves as a baseline to know what the condition of your current forest canopy is, and it can kind of give you an idea of what you want to do to help enhance that and maybe some challenges you may have in other areas where you want to have some enhancements.
And how did this opportunity come about? Why was Millcreek Township selected, and who did you work with, to make this happen for us?
So the opportunity to do tree inventories was piloted last year in a community down towards Pittsburgh. The Bureau of Forestry developed an application with another software company called OpenTreeMap. The intent was to map the urban canopy of the Commonwealth, and so with this application, it makes it very easy to go out with volunteers and actually count the trees, get some different data about it. And so a combination of that and then the Student Conservation Association and the PA Outdoor Corps, they provided the workforce, and we were able to organize an opportunity to see what Millcreek had in their tree canopy.
Ashley,
and I'll just jump in. This is something that, as you know from working together, that we really had been thinking about doing anyways, and previous to this opportunity, and hopefully this continues for other communities too. You have to pay quite a bit amount of money or seek grant funding to get this kind of inventory done. So the fact that the DCNR was in the PA Outdoor Corps was able to kind of partner and give this gift to us in a way, it was really nice and fortuitous for us to, kind of the timing worked out well. It was something that we wanted to do anyways, and now we are, we have all this information and, really well organized for future plans that we have with Tree Vitalize and future tree plantings, and kind of, like he said, establishing a baseline of what's in our parks, how are they doing, where do we have monocultures, and kind of what's going on out there, instead of just visually, we have trees here, it's like we have a lot more knowledge now.
Yeah. And what were the volunteers looking for? You mentioned, again, DCNR staff and the PA Outdoor Corps. What were they looking for in their time here in Millcreek?
So we wanted to identify all the trees in the managed trees within the parks. And so, as we know, like Asbury Park, Zook Park, Scott Park, they all have some forested area, conventional woodlots. What we specifically were looking at were basically if there was mowing going on around the tree, if there was grass around the tree, we were going to count that tree in the park. That's a managed area of the park. Specifically what the crews were looking for is they wanted to identify tree species, the diameter of the tree, which gives us a good idea of the age of the tree potentially, depending on species, but also the general condition of the tree. We wanted to know whether it was in poor condition or if it was vibrant and doing well. Also just maybe if there's some maintenance issues at the time. So we identified that in the data, but then we also geolocated the trees. So with this application, we are actually able to put a GPS mark on a map to where we can actually go back and look and find these trees on kind of a heads-up Google image.
Is that something that the public is able to view as well?
Yes, they are. They can go to OpenTreeMap.org/PA Tree Mapper. That'll show all of the recorded trees within the Commonwealth, and you can zoom into northwestern Pennsylvania and you'll see dark green dots all around the county area. if you find your favorite park, you can go to your park, zoom in, and you'll see a dark green dot. You can click on that dot. It'll tell you what species that tree is and then all the data that we recorded on it.
That's fantastic. And I think our residents are really going to enjoy looking at your results. Again, very interactive, user face, and I'd like to put this link on the screen just so we really do encourage our residents to check it out.
It is. It's up. It's live. You could go today, go check it out, and it is pretty cool. And we plan on, in the future, keeping it current as we plant or as we have to remove, and just really, getting a good snapshot of what is actually out at the park.
So it's not going to be a stagnant model. We're going to continue to update it.
Correct.
And how long did it take to complete all of this inventory of all the Millcreek parks? How long did it take to complete and analyze those results?
I think you'll be stunned.
Oh yeah, so when we first sat down
Mm-hmm.
going through the planning, we knew that there were going to be a lot of trees to count. It's the first time I had been involved with one, and then my counterpart down in Pittsburgh, I talked with her, kind of got an idea of how long it would take, trying to plan out crew hours and be economical with it. I estimated about 1,000 or more trees that we'd be end up counting, so I said we're going to need the whole week. The crews were wonderful. The leadership of the crews specifically were really good, and the kids, they're all local high school kids to Erie County area. A couple are actually from the Millcreek Township area, so they had some local buy-in to it. We were done in under 2.5 days, which was very surprising.
Were you shocked?
I was stunned. Yeah, stunned. He asked me just for a couple parks when we first started, and said, yeah, okay, we'll see, how you do on this. And then next thing I know, he's like, why don't you just give me them all? I think we're going to get to it. And they did. I mean, these kids were great. I think it was very cool that they were local kids. A couple of them were from Millcreek, the rest from surrounding communities. And they were very interested. They were, found the process, fun to do. They were excellent to work with. And I mean, I'm just really grateful for the partnership that we had and proud of it. It was a really fun time, actually.
And you visited a couple times while they were doing the inventory. What did you experience while you were out there visiting?
It's very methodical, which is what I'll say. And Tim did a great job kind of organizing all the crews and sectioning off the park so that trees weren't being double counted and things like that. So they had a method of marking them and then specific directions for measuring them and identifying them. And it moved a lot quicker than I thought it would, and they really had it down to a science. So it was cool to see, and they just very systematically worked their way through the park and got the inventory done.
Tim, the hardest part for me in all of my tree classes that I have taken is actually deciding what species is that particular tree that you're looking at. How, what maybe system or what kind of method do you use? Do you look at the leaves first, the bark first? I mean, I just think identification is the hardest part.
It's a tricky thing. If you're not out in the woods or out looking at trees every day, it's pretty difficult to always keep them straight. You can kind of narrow it down to the various genuses or genera. But yeah, looking at the leaves, looking at the bark, looking at the bud arrangement, there's various characteristics about the tree that we can know. Specific to the inventory, there were Bureau of Forestry personnel with all the groups that were split up. So we were there to help them identify if they had a question about which tree. And we also developed kind of a quick fact sheet guide that they could flip through visually and say, okay, this is a red maple or this is a sugar maple, and they could differentiate between those two and so on from there.
I give them a lot of credit.
Huge, yeah, it was awesome.
How many parks were inventoried?
We inventoried 13 parks, and within those 13 parks, the estimate was pretty close. We had about just over 1,200 trees that we tallied in those couple days.
1,200 trees, and I heard you mention earlier that this was specific to the maintained areas of the park. And so, actually, there's a couple parks that have large wooded acreage behind the park as well. Which parks are those?
So like Zook, Asbury, Scott, they all have some forested areas within them where it's a little denser and we're not going in there mowing or mulching around, everything like that. So those were excluded and they would be surveyed in a little bit different of a manner. So they weren't included. So this was, again, just the areas that we maintain around and that are in the high pedestrian areas, quite frankly, around playgrounds, shelters, the things like that, parking areas.
And so, Tim, 1,209 trees were counted. What species did you find?
We had 70 different species that we found.
Really amazing.
Right. So there's a lot of diversity in the park that's really great. So you talk about trying to identify trees. When we get into our native woods, our native plants are a little bit easier to identify. When we get into our more maintained areas, our community parks, there's a lot of different variants and cultivars that are out there. So yeah, 70 different species. So in general, when you look at it in the numbers, we want to know what the species diversity is. That's really important, whether we're, again, managing forests or managing our urban canopy. And so what we want to do too is all the data is broken down by park. So the township will be able to look at each individual park and make an assessment on the species composition and the relative size class in each of those parks, and then also the general condition of the trees.
And what were some of those major species that you found, or what made up a large percentage?
The large percentage of the top 3 species that we found were in the maple genus, ash genus, and then also in oaks. There's various other species throughout that, but those made up the top. So there's about 6% of the trees were maple, and 20% were ash, and I think it was about 15 or 16% that was oak, and then it made it up through there. And that's just the genus, that's not all the species that are out there.
Were you surprised by the results?
To some degree, yeah. But after driving around, I kind of knew, I had an expectation of there. I was surprised at how much ash there was. And so with 20% ash, that's a significant number.
Ashley, were you surprised?
No, I mean, especially like maples and oaks, I think they're, relatively common. We see them in our neighborhoods and, a lot of the landscape of Pennsylvania. So I wasn't surprised. I guess I had not a lot of expectations going in, but I wasn't surprised that those were some dominant trees. I was thrilled that we have diversity in the way that we do, because that's always an important good thing to have. And then the ash trees, was also kind of surprising. It's a higher number than I was, I guess, hoping for reasons we'll talk about. But
yeah,
it is what it is. We know now.
Yeah, and I was surprised actually by the individual tree number. I guess I never expected in the maintained areas it to be over 1,000 trees, but the total estimated annual benefit was significant. What sort of results were you able to produce and give concrete figures to the township?
So with this, so we got the species composition, the diameter class distribution. Those are hard data points that the township's going to be able to use to manage the parks in that regard. But one of the neat features of this application is that it'll calculate ecosystem services. That's a general term that means just kind of things that trees do for us outside of our conventional shade and timber products that come from them. So if you're utilizing that website, you can select the area of your particular park, or whenever you look at that tree, and you'll see a dollar value assigned to that tree. And that's not necessarily the value of that tree to say purchase value or timber value. That's a value that tree provides to the community. So of all the 13 parks, the 1,200 rough trees, there's about $78,000 worth of value in the ecosystem services. And that includes energy conservation, stormwater mitigation, carbon sequestration, carbon dioxide, air cleaning. Those are all things that are calculated using a software program from the U.S. Forest Service called iTree.
And we're going to put those on the screen because, again, these statistics and what was found from this algorithm that's used to produce these figures is really amazing. So I do want to jump back again. We were talking about the ash trees and how it does make up 20% of our managed tree areas. And so again, just my past knowledge of trees, I was under the impression, and I think this is what you guys are talking about, that the ash trees right now have a current threat, an invasive insect targeting these trees. What is that threat?
So the emerald ash borer is the non-native invasive insect that you're referring to. It's been in the country for a number of years. It was identified, first confirmed in Erie County in 2013. It targets ash trees. It's a flying insect. It'll lay its eggs on the bark of the tree. The eggs will hatch and the larvae will go behind the bark of the tree and they'll overwinter there. And what they do is they actually live behind the bark and they eat the inner bark away. As the infestation increases within a tree, it eventually essentially girdles the tree, suffocates the tree and kills it. What we've seen just through the various forms of research and various universities have put out there, only about 1% to 2% of ash trees in general are resistant to it. So we're looking at a near fatal issue for ash trees in general. So when we see 20% ash trees, we kind of know that there's something they're going to be coming as far as those trees are more than likely going to be dying. So it's the management recommendations that are going to come from that are mitigating the risks that come from those trees being in those areas.
Okay, and Tim, tell me one more time, when did the insect enter Erie County?
It was first in Erie County in 2013, and so with the life cycle of the insect and its interaction with the ash trees, we've learned that it takes about 3 to 5 years for the bug to infest a tree and then kill that tree.
Okay,
so we're right at that 5-year window. window from the first infestation in Erie
Right.
County.
Right. Okay. And moving forward, what's the best course of action for Millcreek Township? Because again, if it's almost near 100% fatality for these trees, again, you said they're in the managed park areas. That would mean that these may be close to building structures, playground equipment, parking lots. What's our best course of action moving forward?
So utilizing the data and then going through and the time that we've spent in the parks, I've gone through and identified trees, and we're going to prioritize trees based on their current condition. We're going to look at trees, mark them for removal, the ones that pose the highest risk to the public. And through that, we're going to systematically, we've developed a plan to be able to go forward and have systematically over the next year or so be able to have targeted removals of those trees. And the main objective of this is public safety.
Yeah, I do want to emphasize that. So, once we know this and we know what we're facing and we know that these trees are succumbing to this insect, there's, it's nature, it's out of our hands at this point in time. I mean, there haven't been effective ways to stop the emerald ash borer. So we are, the township is taking a pretty serious stance on it, and, we want public safety to be first and foremost in our parks, and people feel comfortable going there and using what we have. So Tim has been great in helping us kind of figure out where do we go with this, where to start type of thing with the prioritization of all the trees. And it is going to unfortunately mean removal in a lot of areas. But, we do have plans as always to replant, and we really try to do that anytime we have to do removals. So while it's unfortunate that we are going to lose a handful of trees in a lot of different areas, we do plan on getting back in there and replanting with native species that can hopefully stay with us longer.
Right. And Ashley, I know together we worked on a planting for Lakewood Park. And tell us what you're, through your, these premeditated plans and thoughts and actions, what you're trying to avoid.
Sure. Well, even by coming here today, we're trying to help educate everybody about what's going on and why the landscape of your favorite park might change a little bit over the next year. And, from what we learned from Lakewood, so Lakewood, we had silver maples?
Yes, silver
maples. I always get silver and sugar confused, but silver maples that had reached their lifespan, and they were rotted out and unstable in the center. And one did fall in the park and didn't hurt anybody but damaged a car. So that kind of was alarming and really started my wheels turning, as we need to take a proactive approach to our tree management, and so that we're not having these situations, because it's my biggest fear, and I think a lot of people at the townships too, to ever have a child or an adult, anybody really, hurt by a tree that could have been prevented. So we have learned from that the best thing is, we're going to be open, honest with the public about what's going on, try to educate them about why this is happening in the area, and help people understand that unfortunately these trees are dying, and as they die they become very unstable, and we just need to do what we need to do to keep everybody safe. But that there is a replanting plan, and we will be reapplying for our Tree Vitalized grants again through the DCNR to help get funding to replace these trees, and continue building our canopy throughout Millcreek Township, and just regenerating and keeping it around so that for future generations to come, your favorite parks still have a nice green feel to them that they always did.
And Ashley, I know, again, from your Lakewood experience, you want to avoid a monoculture. And not that the ash trees, again, there's only 20%, but if they're concentrated in one park and you remove them all, essentially we're looking at, again, removing another monoculture. So when you replant, what are you looking at?
We're definitely going to look at diversifying, and we're going to reach out to Tim as always and kind of get suggestions on native species that will do well in the conditions of whatever that park is, based on soil and, proximity to roads and salts and things like that. So we'll kind of look to just bring in some nice new native trees and mix it up a little bit, and have some nice strong replacements for the ash trees.
Yeah. And Tim, why is, I've heard you mention that the ash tree is dangerous once it is a dead tree.
It's a lot different than other trees. So if people are familiar with some of the recent history in the last 10, 20 years with gypsy moth, they target oak trees. Oak trees are a lot more rot resistant than our ash trees, and so sometimes the oak tree may stand dead for a while, and then it's a lot easier to take down. Ash are very different. They actually rot pretty quickly. So when they succumb to the ash borer, we start seeing the branches start to thin out up top with the canopy going away. Branches start coming down pretty quickly. And then for the operators, the people that are actually going to be bringing the trees down and putting a sod to it, it becomes pretty dangerous once the tree is degraded that far. So in some cases, it's a best course of action that we may see an ash tree that is full green and doing really well. It seems like it's pretty resilient relative to its neighbors. But in a park and managed area, it's just much better to be able to be proactive and remove that tree much earlier.
And you said, and again, to the trained eye, there are some signs that maybe not, your average person would be able to recognize.
Yeah, so when we see our ash trees, I mean, there's only about 3 different species of tree that are oppositely arranged, which means that their twigs and buds are opposite from each other on the branch. So that's a telltale sign of ash. They also have compound leaves, which are pretty large, multiple leaflets on their leaves. And they kind of have a netted bark shape or a bark pattern to them. So those are some ID features of ash trees. We start seeing them succumbing to ash borer, we'll see the canopy thinning out. And so we're losing our leaves right now in autumn, but in next spring when we start seeing new leaves come out, you'll see about half the amount in each tree. And every year it just keeps going down and down. The telltale sign that a tree is fully infested though is woodpecker damage. Woodpeckers are doing pretty well. They're profiting well off of emerald ash borer because of the larva behind the bark. So they'll work very hard to excavate and chip away the bark and get at those larvae behind the bark. When they do that, it flecks off some of the bark and it becomes like a very stark difference between the coloration. So those are some signs to it. Once you start seeing those, you know that tree is succumbing to it. But kind of a general guideline is if you have an ash tree, you want to have a professional come and assess it and then go forward from there.
Okay. And so if our viewers, and that is a question, and you just answered it for me, if our viewers think, again, this is not specific to our Millcreek Township parks, this is all around Millcreek Township, all around Erie County, all around Pennsylvania, and really in the Great Lakes region, if I understand that correctly. What can we do to further prevent the spread?
So in general, but many people probably saw when we first had emerald ash borer come in the Don't Move firewood.org billboards, and they're going to be coming back up some more. Not moving firewood is one of the biggest things that people can do to mitigate not only emerald ash borer, but many other forest pests out there. We're not sure just how certain non-native pests may be in our wood piles. So a general guideline is burn it where you buy it. If you cut down an ash tree, burn it on your property. Keep it in the county. If you can keep it in Erie County, you're doing pretty well. And that's a good rule. Outside of emerald ash borer, like I said previously, there's other non-native forest pests that are out there. And by keeping a kind of self-imposed quarantine, only burning your firewood where you're at, and not moving it across county lines, that will significantly prevent any other future outbreaks.
Okay. And Tim, I do want to wrap up on a positive note. I want to talk about still, even though we have emerald ash borer, we're going to manage it responsibly. Just quickly, can you just go over maybe some of the bullet points of why trees are so important to the community and how they impact us?
So I mentioned earlier, like the economic impact that we have, that we can quantify the numbers, that the value that the tree gives to the community. But beyond that, there's a lot of research that has now come out more and more that treed areas, green spaces, they clean our air. Photosynthesis, just the idea of pulling carbon dioxide out of there, they give us the oxygen, they mitigate stormwater. So those are some issues that we have just on a pragmatic approach, but crime rates are lower where there's more trees. People's social interactions are much better. Mental health is much better in areas where there's trees and green spaces. And so with this data that's come from this inventory, the township's going to be able to go forward and have a very careful plan to make sure that their parks are in the best condition they can be.
Well, thank you so much, both of you, for joining me today. I know that we are very, very appreciative of the DCNR and the PA Outdoor Corps for completing this tree inventory for us. I know, again, we've I don't want to say found out a surprise about the emerald ash borer, but we're taking it very seriously. So I want to thank you so much for all the hard work you put in.
No, it's my pleasure. I enjoy doing this.
Thank you guys for being on the show today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Viewers, again, Millcreek Township has recently just completed, with the help of the DCNR, a tree inventory. You can go online and specifically look at those GPS locations that are available on the map. And again, what we found is that we have the emerald ash borer here in town, not only in our our parks, but maybe in your backyard too. So what I want you to do is, if you think you have the emerald ash borer, please give Tim a call, and he will be able to give you instructions on what you should do moving forward. And again, if you have any questions about the tree removals or the tree replantings that are going to be happening at our parks because of this invasive pest, please feel free to direct those towards Ashley Marsteller, our Parks and Rec Department Director. And again, thank you for tuning into the Millcreek Government Channel, and until next time, have a wonderful day.